Hello fellow humans and welcome to the top 5 tier 8 tanks of 2023, because obviously the year just started, so what are the best tier 8 tanks to get right now? Now, the first one obviously is and always was the T-54E2. Now what is that? It has good DPM, it got penetration, it's got alpha damage, gun depression, accuracy, all of it, even got armor and mobility as well. So basically, you can't really go wrong with this vehicle. It can do a bit of everything, which is very important. This is the best one. Why? Because it can do absolutely everything, and no matter who plays it, if you can't play this tank, you simply can't play Blitz. Because it can do everything. It's got the armor, it's got the mobility, it's got a pretty solid gun, and it has the gun depression as well. It's accurate, so you don't miss shots on purpose. So basically, if you're not good at this thing, you're most likely not very good at Blitz, or you're a very weird specialist that is only good at one certain part of Blitz. And that's kind of the thing with this tank. You don't need to be good at anything to play this tank, because it can do everything for you. Let's say if you buy yourself a Kanoniniac Panzer, well, you have to be good at camping at the rear, and you have to exactly know how that works. With this thing, I mean, you can go hold down. You shouldn't go city, because that's the worst thing you can do to any tank that has gun depression, obviously. Because if you have gun depression and you have a good turret, then that's what you use, because that's your biggest advantage. You wouldn't want to throw that away by going into a flat city that has 90-degree angles. That kind of place is something where a VK100 goes, where a VK90 goes. Not this thing. Definitely not. You don't want to put that there. So, in this vehicle, you have a combination of pretty much everything. Obviously, that doesn't make it OP. Because for a tank to be OP, it has to be 10, 15, 20% better than everything else. Not 5. So, you know, and then again, if you then... Some people are going to go like, look on Blitz stars and, oh, this tank has a lower win rate than that tank, it must be worse. Sales volumes and who plays it matters more than the tank. Because the player is always more influential on the tank than the tank, because the tank on its own can't do anything. The tank on its own is useless. If you put a 40% player in a smasher, they might get 42%, but they're still gonna be horrible. So the player is the bigger factor here, which means this tank pretty much gives you an ideal baseline for whatever type of player you are. Obviously, as I said, if you're a specific type of player, then it might not work out, but I'm convinced that for 80% of players, this thing works. 80% of players that can play the game, obviously, because if you can't play the game, you can't play this tank, obviously. So, that is something that's very important. And overall, it's got everything, right? You've got the turret armor. Now, you have a cupola on top, which is annoying. You don't want to have that. However, it's a very small cupola, and it's sort of in the back of the middle of the tank, so it's alright. You gotta watch out with it though. Keep it wiggling back and forth. You got the mobility to wiggle it back and forth, so you gotta use that. Also, you got the accuracy to hit this kind of thing. So it has everything. What else do you want? And it is a bit sad that most of the tanks that are really good now are premium tanks, but I mean, the age of power creep does never stop. Then at number 2, we have the Type 57, and it kind of stands representative for all the has a lot of armor, a lot of alpha damage, but isn't accurate tanks like the 2FTU, the Skoda, whatever that is, and all those kind of things. Now, why is this one the one that I pick? Well, because it has gun depression, and it does have 1.9k DPM, 430 alpha damage, okay-ish accuracy. The mobility is somewhat similar to that of the TT4, and the armor is pretty good as well. Obviously, the lower plate is a weak spot. However, with 9 degrees of gun depression and a pretty damn solid turret and 430 alpha damage, this thing is pretty damn good. So what you basically do here in relation to the T-54 is you trade away a bit of DPM, trade away a tiny bit of mobility to get more alpha damage, which is great. And for a newer player, for a more inexperienced player, this is certainly a better option than a T-4, because if you don't have skill, you need armor. If you don't have armor and you don't have skill, you get nothing done. So this thing is a very good sort of entry-level premium tank. Now, The problem with this thing is mostly the price. You also have the 2FTU. You have the 112-2. You have that Skoda thing. You got the other one that I can't remember. So there are a lot of tanks that are like this. But the reason I picked this is because this one has the best package. Overall, this is the kind of type of tank that you kind of want to start with. You know, something big and bullish, because you're shit if you started the game. I was shit when I started playing Blitz. So something like a TT4 is amazing for a intermediate to advanced player. This is a bit better for the complete and utter noob. Now, ideally, you do not want to get any type of premium tank when you're really new. Especially not an IS-6, which is, I don't know why they sell that for 7k gold. It's just, I mean, if you compare the performance of the type with the performance of that, then, you know, you have a very clear picture there. So this type of tank is really very suited for beginners. Now, obviously, for tournaments, something like this is also very useful, because tournaments basically has two modes. Either brawl until someone wins, or sit in the cap circle until someone loses on points. That's how tournaments work. So a tank like this is good for that as well, and the Type 71 and 10 whatever, because you've got the gun depression, you've got good enough mobility to get to the cap circle, and you've got enough armor to hold it, and you've got alpha damage that is sufficient to make them annoying. Now in this game, as you can probably see, the team has sort of decided to kind of throw away. Now, why am I over here? I don't know. Why is the Smasher camping out there? I also don't know. So, obviously this is not going to end really well for me here. However, despite missing like 50 bazillion times, again, you can still see what this thing is about. Obviously, the most important thing is always, don't fight 5 people at the same time. That's the worst thing you can do. Never do that, never fight 5 people at the same time. But, if you get 1v1s with this tank, no matter who it is, especially if it's a tier 7, or that happens, then you're pretty much going to come out on top in a lot of cases, given that they're not a significantly better player than you. If you're about even, then this thing is going to make you win a lot more than you should, and that's why it's on the list, because it's a great tank, and obviously also the 2FTU and all those other things, they work pretty much the same, they are the same, and I wouldn't put them on here. Then the third one, it is the Chimera. Why? It's got all of the things mentioned before as well. It's got the gun depression, it got good mobility. Well, it's below average for a medium tank, but it's still very good. The penetration's there, the accuracy's there, the alpha damage 440, which is outstanding for a medium tank. And the armor, while not particularly great, you have the alpha damage, which means you don't have to peek a lot. The thing is about the Chimera, it just works, right? Like, the armor is pretty bad. So again, this is more of an advanced kind of player's tank. But it's not as advanced as something like a RU-251 or a Canoniac Panzer or a Progetto, even, because a Progetto can't pin anything. So, I think I just made every single Progetto fanboy mad, but that's how it works. A tank that is harder to play, that doesn't make it better. That makes it worse. So, this thing is relatively okay to play. However, the medium with 440 alpha damage, which slaps quite a lot, and that's 4 shells so that you reach tier 10 average damage, because the tier 10 average damage is about 1700. You need 4 shots to get there with this vehicle. So that's already quite easy. And now, you don't quite have that armor of a TT4 or a Type 57. I also don't have a team in this case, which is lovely, but despite that, and despite the sort of mediocre-ish DPM of this tank, it can still hold its own just about fine enough. Now again, every single time, don't fight multiple people at the same time. That's about the worst thing you can do. Don't try and play a hero, that's gonna backfire spectacularly. And what I'm going to try to do here is, I know we're 3 guys, basically. I'm 17 HP, and the Löwe is doing that. Now, the Löwe is sort of a bit more passive tank than people think it is, because the armor's not amazing. However, that passive is stupid. So, anyway, in this case, what I'm kind of trying to do is I'm trying to dance around my own team so that I can get shots and they get shot, which is how every super unit can plays. And number 4, we have the SMV CC64. However, there is a very important condition, and that is only with the regular gun. Equipping this vehicle with the auto reloader makes it absolutely horrible. However, this gun is a monster. 3k DPM, 410 alpha damage, on a chassis that is fast enough, and that has a somewhat workable turret. It's got 11 degrees of gun depression in certain spots, which is quite a lot. Now, there aren't any tank destroyers on this list. This thing is pretty much a hybrid of heavy and tank destroyer. It's not a T-30, which is completely 100% a heavy tank, because obviously this thing can't turn its turret, and it also can't turn, so it's got that handicap. The gun on this thing is excellent. Now, high alpha damage, high DPM. That's the absolute best thing you can have. The opposite of that is low alpha damage, low DPM, like a Type 71, which is what you don't want. So, in terms of the gun. Now, this thing, it can't turn, as I already said. But the armor of it, it's not paper, it's pretty solid, and you are going to struggle to pen this thing if you're in a terrain that, like a Progetto, has no penetration. Or all of the other tanks like that. You're going to need 225, 230, ideally 240 to be able to actually challenge this thing properly. And if you're a tier 7, forget it. And while you're challenging this thing, it's going to pick you apart with 3000 DPM, which is obviously very, very lovely. So this thing with a standard gun is an absolute monster. Now, sadly, the T9 and the T10 do not have such a gun. They only have the horrible auto-reloading gun with a reserve shell. It's not good. So that's kind of the big, huge handicap of this vehicle, that this is it. This is the best you'll get in the Italian tank destroyer line. You're not going to get it any better than this. This tank is amazing. After that, only follows disappointment. Now, 2 minutes, 2k damage. That's very solid. Now, I don't want to just cherry pick ace games for this, because then just, if you pick aces for every single tank, you make every single tank look good. Which means I just play one game. It's the game I'm gonna take, unless it's like 0 damage, horrible, because that makes it more authentic, obviously, and kind of represents a more real-world scenario, because most ace games aren't based just on skill; they're also based on luck, and luck isn't a statistic you can measure. Well, you can measure probability, but that's a different story. So this thing is great. The 5th one, which is a little bit harder to play, but still very good, the Centurion 5.1. Now, the huge downside of this vehicle is that its alpha damage is only 190, which is horrible. However, other than that, you have the gun depression, you got the speed, you got very good armor on the turret especially. So if you can handle the very low alpha damage, this thing is excellent. Now, for a heavy tank, this kind of alpha damage, and for a tank destroyer as well, this kind of alpha damage would be absolutely breaking it, like an Action X. However, this thing, you can't pen the damn turret unless you try very, very hard. And, I mean, it's a Centurion, so it's pretty big. However, it's pretty well armored. The hull not so much, but the turret is very, very good. Now, you also got very solid DPM on this thing. So, overall, you've got a package that is good. Because that's the thing, right? Because a one-trick pony is not cool. You want to have a good package, a tank that can do everything, right? And this is one of those. Now, what it can't do is track tanks, because obviously the lower alpha damage you have, the lower module damage you have. And obviously, that is a huge, huge downside, and that's why it maybe doesn't 100% belong on this list. It's more of lack of better alternatives. So, this thing is sold. That's been sold for alright prices. Now, if this thing would be sold for like 6k, that would be absolutely amazing and perfect. Other than that, maybe not. But this thing is what a lot of tier 8 mediums are not. It can actually pen things. It has a pretty much impenetrable turret. It's got the mobility that is, well, present. And that's all you want. And it's got the full level of gun depression as well. That is what a lot of tier 8 mediums don't have. So despite it having 190 alpha damage instead of 240, still is on here. Because it just got a better package. could argue for something like a Pantera, but again, it don't got armor. Armor makes a tank harder to play, and harder to play is not cool. Because I'm not reviewing for Super Unicums, because Super Unicum can review for themselves. If they can't review for themselves, they're not a Super Unicum. So, at this point, what we're gonna do, get rid of the ML2, which is bad. But, in 3 minutes, we're done. Almost done 3k damage. Despite the low alpha damage, just gotta be a bit careful. You don't wanna, you know, again, fight multiple people at the same time. And you wanna make sure that every time the enemy shoots, you shoot back twice. And you can. Thank you very much for watching. What do you think of the list? See you in the next one. Bye.